Hello, Margot slash Pearl. You'll explain why later. Welcome to What If I Say Yes? How are you?
I'm fine. I'm very excited. I've been thinking a lot about what it means, yes and no. And yeah, it's fun. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, first, let's have you introduce yourself. Who are you?
My name is Margot Dodds. I was born as Margaret Whitfield Dodds when I was 12. I hated that name because my brothers couldn't pronounce it. So everybody called me Bargar, and I was really big and fat, and I felt like Babar the elephant. So we moved to a new town, and I picked a name that my brothers could pronounce and that I could live with. And I wrote away for a social security card so it would be legal. And back then, they sent me a social security card, even though my birth certificate name was different. So when I started to write books, I became Pearl Whitfield. I took my middle name, and Margaret means Pearl. So I write under the name Pearl Whitfield. My passport and my driver's license are under Margaret because that's what my birth certificate says. But when I retired and took Medicare, then I'm Margot. So now I'm 3 different names.
Oh my goodness.
I worked as a nurse for many years, about 40 plus years, and retired maybe 5 or 6 years ago to commute to Cambodia, where I have a grandson.
Oh, lovely. At what age did you request the new Social Security card?
I requested a Social Security card when I was age 12 because I thought that would make my name legal, my new chosen name of Margot Dodds.
So how was that possible? You were underage.
It was long ago. Long ago and far away. I can't explain it. Maybe I think at that time children didn't have birth certificate. I mean, it didn't have Social Security at birth.
Oh,
they didn't get a number at birth, so you had to write away and get it later on.
So
usually when you started working.
You went from Margot to Pearl?
I went from Margaret to Margot. My mother and my father had the same name. They were both named Dodds, and every male in the family married a Margaret. So there were about 12 Margaret Doddses in the immediate family, and all of the names were taken. The nicknames for Margaret were taken. So I thought it over and decided that Margot would work for me.
Okay, so now I think I got it. You went from Margaret to Margot, and then you write under the name Pearl.
Correct.
So that's the 3 names.
Just to make life confusing. My daughter gets very upset with me because I talk sometimes about Pearl in the 3rd person, and she thinks I'm dissociating. I said, no, I'm not dissociating. I know the difference.
How do they call you?
Well, they call me Bachan, which is Japanese for grandma.
Okay.
Because, well, that's a long story. Okay. They asked me what I wanted to when I became a grandmother. I said I want to be called Meemaw, and they went, Meemaw, that's redneck. And I was like, that's what I want. You asked. So the first year I was Meemaw. Then my daughter became pregnant. She said, we are not calling you Meemaw. My son and his wife said, well, it's too confusing for the children if you have 2 names, one for Cambodia and one for here. And I'm like, yeah, well, what about being called Mom and Margot? Anyway, now I'm Bachan, so.
Okay. Now let's explain how we know each other.
We know each other through my friend Montana Lee Masters, who is an artist, and I first saw her in the grocery store in the little town we lived in. She had moved fairly recently, and she was just the most interesting looking person. I thought, I want to know that person. And she and you were friends from a long time ago.
Yes.
And I'm not exactly sure how we ended up, you and I talking, had something to do with my first book. but I don't know how that happened. I think maybe Montana said, oh, you should talk to my friend Lucia. So you helped me with that.
So Montana is actually my interviewee number 10 in this channel. And so one day when I started the website, whatifisayes.com, one of the sections was in my blog was book with my twin brother. And I mentioned as the introduction that I had this project of self-publishing a book of my pictures and his paintings. And then Montana read that and said, oh, you should speak to Pearl because she self-published her book. And so she put us in touch. And
yes. Did you end up writing that book and publishing it? Not yet.
No. That's still in progress.
It's the long yes.
I mean, because it has to do with me, the way I work, and my twin brother and the way he works. So we have two different paces, and mine is more much more urgent than his.
You are pronto.
Yes. So maybe one
you're
day,
the first twin.
maybe one day. I haven't given up on the idea of one day doing it, but yeah, not yet. So let's jump right in. Tell us what was a moment in your life when you may have asked the question, what if I say yes? Then you answered yes, and you did something. What was it?
Okay. There are lots of times that I have said yes, but I didn't really have any qualms about it. I was, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. Like when I moved to the middle of nowhere in Eastern Oregon, there was no question about any other choice because I drove into that valley and I knew that I was home and I knew what the feeling was, even though I had never felt it before in my life. So that wasn't really saying yes, even though I was leaving another life, it wasn't saying yes. So I think the time that I really said yes was when I started to write a book. Mm-hmm. First, I wasn't writing a book. First, I was just writing a little story because I woke up in the morning with a little bit, just a little bit of it. It was almost like a little video clip of a man, and I knew his name and I knew his dog's name. And there was a little girl on the steps of the store he had just bought, and he was opening the blind in the door of the store. And he'd never been a storekeeper, just a storekeeper in a small town now. Mm-hmm. And he saw the little girl, and so it's just, but he had never had children. So it was something about their relationship. So I knew that's all I knew. And so I started to write it because I felt like it was a story that wanted to be told. Mm-hmm. But first it was just a little story. Mm-hmm. And it was a longer little story. It was a longer little story. And then I was in a writing group that didn't do criticism, which is my preference. It's very hard. It's very hard to keep doing something when people are criticizing you. For me, some people thrive under criticism. One of my brothers, it turns out, thrived under criticism. And one of his stepdaughters said to me as we're sitting around his dead body in the living room this August, and she said, his love language was criticism. Wow. He thought if he was criticizing you, he was helping you. He cared enough to help you improve. Well, he was somebody, I didn't even tell him I was maybe thinking of writing something longer than a little story. We didn't really talk about it at all. And I would never have told him because my baby writer self was way too fragile. Mm-hmm. So I was in a writing group, so I would read what I was writing in the writing group. And then one day I was also reading at a library doing adult reading, how do I say this? I was doing readings for adults, like a lunchtime book reading, so adults could come and enjoy having a story read to them. And usually I would pick other books from the library, and that day I hadn't picked a book. And so I did have my own book, and I read a chapter and people really liked it. And so I did that a couple of times. I got kind of used to coming out, but it was a friendly audience. And then after about 15 chapters, I started to whisper that I was writing a book. It's not just a story anymore. It's going to be a book. But I didn't tell my brother, the critic, because he, it wouldn't work. I would shut down. So I began to practice. I kept writing. I didn't write regularly, but I would write, and then I'd write a little more, and sometimes I'd stop writing for a long time. And I didn't know if I liked the story. I didn't know if the characters would still talk to me. And I would go back and read a chapter or two, and I'd say, this is kind of sweet. I like it. And they would talk. So I'd sit down and they'd come up with something else that they were doing in their lives. So it was really interesting process. And finally, I started to say out loud that I was writing a book, but I still wouldn't be able to tell. I could tell my brother, but I wouldn't read it to him. My other brother, I could read chapters to him, and he'd say, oh, that's so sweet. Will you read me another chapter? So I had to protect myself because my yes was very fragile. I could write, but I couldn't call it a book, And one time somebody liked the chapter. I let somebody read the chapter. She knew I was writing a book, and she loved it. But she said, I think this sentence needs a comma right here. It was 6 weeks before I started to write again. I was like, what in the world is going on? And then I remembered, aha, a comma. Somebody said no, and I took it to heart. So sometimes it's hard to protect your yes.
How old were you when you had that first image in your mind, the kind of video?
Well, let's see. The book took about 8.5 years to write, and I finished it maybe in 2019 or 2020, maybe 2020. So maybe 68, 70, 68 or so. Yeah.
Before that, did you ever consider writing stories or books or anything?
Well, I didn't technically consider it, but there was a point when I found out that Margaret meant pearl and my middle name was Whitfield. I was probably in my early 60s at that time. And I thought, wow, Pearl Whitfield, what a great name for an old author. If I ever write a book, that's what I'll do. But I never really thought I would write a book. I would write, memoir, journaling and things like that. But and occasionally a little tiny short story would come out. I had tried to write, I tried to submit a story for I did submit a story for a contest, and it was rejected. Of course, I'm sure, hundreds of them were rejected, but it wasn't helpful for me. In fact, I still haven't gotten back to that. I'm sure now that that's actually a book. And I will write it, but if I have time, I'll write it. But it's not high on the list of books at this point.
So this first book, what's the title?
The first book's title is The Storekeeper, A Tale of Small Town Life. And that's really what it is. It's life in a small town. I've lived in small towns my entire adult life. And
you self-published it.
And I self-published it, yes. I self-published because I couldn't take criticism. I didn't want anybody to edit it. The first edition, I just published the second edition of it. And now I've had enough experience and practice thinking of myself as an author that I could go back and edit out some things and tighten it up a little bit and fix a lot of typos. And then also understand that there's no way that I can format a book. So I hire help, professional help to format because they know what they're doing. And it is a total nightmare if you're not really tech savvy.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had done everything, but then in the final version, I've got gutters that are, 2 inches wide. So the book is really fat. And then it was in different fonts, even though I hit select all, no, it didn't work. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, there's a place for asking for help.
Yes.
Even
So
for help.
I'm sorry?
Even paying for help. Yeah. Ask for it and pay for it. So yeah.
What happened to that book? What was the life, or what has been the life of that first book?
The life of the first book was more rocky in a way than the life of the second book.
Mm-hmm.
I sent it out to, people who read it really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of them really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
The man who's the protagonist, his wife dies, which is why he ends up in the small town. He puts the dog in the truck and drives around the country, United States, modern day, and ends up in a little town in the Intermountain West and buys the mom and pop store kind of on the spur of the moment. And I was thinking about it today, I realized people say, well, is it autobiographical? And I'm like, no, I guess he went into that valley, and when he drove in, he felt relaxed and comfortable, which is kind of, it wasn't like he felt like he was home. He'd had a home with his wife, but it was still, he had said yes in that moment to doing something different and having a new life. And so people who read it liked it, and it's I'm not sure what's going to happen with the second edition. I think it will be a little better received, in broadly received. I don't know. We'll see. It's one thing to write a book. It's another thing to publish a book, to be published by an editor, to go through that whole process of sending out the letters. There's a wonderful cartoon of a guy writing, dear sir, I received your rejection letter, and I just want to tell you it's not up to the level of rejection up to the level of rejection letters that I am used to receiving. So things like that are very, it's helpful for me to have humor. I find if I have a little humor, then it doesn't, things don't poke me as deeply. And
so did your brother, the critic, did he get to read it?
He never read it. His wife read it and loved it. I'm certain he never read it. I gave him a copy. Well, I gave them a copy, and I'm sure he never read it. It wouldn't be the kind of book that he would like. It's not highbrow. It's not intellectual. It's kind of like more like country music. It's more like a Hallmark movie. And so he never read it, and that's fine. He never read the other one either. But that it wasn't his style. He was, hard hitting, a real jock, and, a doctor, excellent doctor, great guy, but we were just very different in our approaches to life. And I didn't think he would like it. He could have read it if he'd wanted to, but I'm sure he didn't.
What about other family members?
Other family members, my son read it and liked it. My daughter read it and liked it. My my ex-husband thought it was wonderful. He really
good.
In fact, he said he wrote right back and said that this guy is a paladin. He's really this wonderful sort of heroic figure, but not larger than life. Just anyway, it was really, so people who read it, a lot of them like it. And
So,
people who and Montana, did the cover for that, because she's an artist, a fabulous artist, and she was very interested in what the store was like. I knew I wanted the store on the cover, and so we had a lot of conversations about what the store was like, and she read the book to kind of get an idea for the cover art of what the store was. Because the store is really a central character in the book, because it's the meeting place for everybody in town.
So you get this image video idea, you start writing, it takes you 8-something years to finally finish it. And then you decide you're going to publish it. You're going to self-publish it.
Yes.
How was that process?
Well, it was very painful. I had to reread the book. I've probably read that book now 150 times. I have to say, I like the book every time.
Oh, good.
I'm really tired of having to read it for those purposes. So formatting it was really difficult. And at the time, I didn't know that I could ask for help and get it without having a publisher, that there are people out there who will help self-published authors. And I had a number of friends who'd self-published books. I was in several writing groups in my town, and a couple of people had published books. And so I learned from them, what platform they used. There are a lot of platforms for publishing now for independent authors. And the major distributor for independent books and libraries is called Ingram. And a lot of people publish under Amazon. But an independent bookstore, first of all, Amazon is trying to kill independent bookstores, obviously, direct competition. And independent bookstores, some won't even accept a book that comes from Amazon.
Oh.
So I mean, if I purchase an author copy and have it mailed to a bookstore, some bookstores won't accept it because it's related to Amazon. Well, I can get it and bring it to me, and I can put it in my car and bring it to you. It's still from Amazon. But so they have to get a certain amount of money to stay in business. It's a 60s. The bookstore needs to keep 60% of the sale price in order to stay in business. And so the author gets 40%, but then Amazon also takes a cut, or the publisher takes a cut. So you end up making just a very small amount. But I do try to support independent bookstores where I can. Now Ingram has its own publishing platform. And the book I'm currently writing, I may switch to Ingram if I can find it easily. I have a little bit of an international audience, and I don't know how that will work on Ingram. And it's not always easy to find answers to questions like that. So I haven't researched too much. I learned about Ingram Spark, but for my second book, I went with Amazon because I knew it. I just hired somebody to do formatting. But I now know most formatters can format for any venue, any platform, any publishing platform.
When you finally had the first book in your hands, what did you feel? What did you think?
Oh my gosh, I was so excited. I couldn't believe it. Actually, the first copy, I didn't hold the first copy. The first copy was in Japan. A friend of mine in Japan sent me a picture of him with his first copy, because in Japan, they published it faster. Amazon has a Japan publishing house. So anyway, it was very, very exciting. I mean, it's really, you can see the picture. It's big smile on my face. It's quite a feeling, I love it. So yeah, it's fun.
And so the experience must have been so good that you decided to then write a second book.
Well, yes. Yeah, that's true. The second book, see, I have a number of I have a number of stories that aren't full. I mean, they're like little, starts with like just a little nugget. And then, but now I know there's a story behind it. And the second book was started from a very powerful experience that I had where I saw the end of the book. I saw the end. I mean, and so when I started to write, I thought, okay, so I know how it ends. Storekeeper, I knew how it began. I had no idea what would happen after that. I'm learning along with everybody else in the story. For Apsara, which takes place in 12th century Cambodia, I knew how it ended, but how did that woman get there? What happened in her life? She was chosen as a young child to train as a dancer, turns out, for the most famous king in Cambodian history. And I mean, I knew that she had danced for him in the little bit that I had. But I didn't. I wondered how does somebody become a dancer in 12th century Cambodia? And so some of it's sort of exploring. I mean, it's a combination of research and then listening inside to what the story might be. And as I start to write, then a whole movie will come forward. So people tell me that my writing, when they hear me read, they can see it. Because I'm writing what I see, and I'm writing what I hear and what I smell and what people are saying to each other. So it's fun.
What's the title of this one?
The second one is called Apsara. Apsara is what the traditional dancers are called. They're from Hindu mythology. They're celestial beings that dance to bring heaven to earth and bless the earth with fullness and prosperity. And
we need a lot of those dancers these days.
We need a lot of those dancers. It's true. Well, and in Cambodia, the traditional dance has been lost over the last 1,000 years. Nobody really knows what happened to the civilization, but it was this very highly evolved civilization that deteriorated quite rapidly after the 12th century. And the kingdom covered all of Southeast Asia except only the southern part of Burma or Myanmar. Covered everything. It subsumed Thailand. There was all of Laos, but the tiny northern corner, and some of Vietnam. And the rest of Southeast Asia was Cambodia. So something happened, but we don't know what. And so it was interesting to do the research, but to some extent, the traditional dancing died over the course of time. People lost how to do it. But the biggest problem was in the 1970s, when the Khmer Rouge, or it's spelled Khmer, the French transliterated the Cambodian what they heard, and they heard Khmer, but really it's pronounced Khmer. So the Khmer Rouge took over. They were a semi-communist group of guerrillas, and they engaged in complete genocide, killed millions of people. Anybody who had been educated, who wore glasses, which would indicate that you might be able to read, who was a teacher, who owned a business, all the people with competencies other than farming were targeted for slaughter. So they either left the country or they were killed. So there aren't very many people in my generation in Cambodia now.
Wow. So sad.
Yeah, very sad. And so they stamped out, all culture related to anything that they didn't think was proper and appropriate. And the king's sister has been trying to bring back the traditional dance. And it's very wonderful to see the performances when they get together and do it. It's somewhat like Thai dancing. I can't dance at all, but you know, with the gestures where each gesture means something, as it does in India and Thailand.
Beautiful. And now, are you working on a third book?
I am working on a third book. It's called The Confession, and it starts in a hospital in Vancouver, Washington, run by the Sisters of Providence.
Okay.
Whose vow is celibacy and service, and particularly service to the poor. And so they've opened a hospital. They've been in, this is in 1889, and they went to Vancouver in 1856. And so there's a nun in the hospital that night, and this really horrible guy. I hate him, my protagonist. Anyway, he's really, really bad. I have a real charge on that guy. And I'm writing the book because I had such a strong reaction that I felt maybe there was something in it. Instead of saying no, it's okay. Instead of saying no, I don't like that. I don't like those feelings. I don't like that man. I'm not going to do it. People are, Margaret, you don't have to write it. Well, I don't have to, but what is in there if I don't say no? If I say yes, what, you know, there may be some healing in it for me. So anyway, he's a horrible guy, but he just calls her over to his bedside and says he wants to make his confession. And so it's the story of his life, his wife's life, and their children's lives.
How did you get the idea for this one?
I'm in a group called that does soul collage. Have you ever heard of soul collage? It uses images to bypass the conscious thinking monkey brain and go deeper. So you choose images. First you meditate, you center, relax, and focus on, it might be a question that you have. It might be something that the leader will often suggest something, but if you have a problem in your life that you're working out, you might want to focus your intention on that. And then in a sort of state of peace and silence, you go about a room where there are tables covered with images. So you don't make the image yourself. And I thought originally, oh, I don't want somebody else to cut out my images. I want to, but really you'd spend your entire time going through a magazine and clipping things. So, so I understand now, it's good. And if there's an image that strongly attracts you, or one that you have a strong negative reaction to, pick that image. And then you have little cards, 5x8 cards, and you put down the images. It's not about being arty. It's not about making it perfect. I mean, it might be for somebody, but that's not the goal. The goal is to put it down, and then you process the cards to see what it was about. And I had a card of an old, like an old bum, eating a meal in a shelter somewhere, and a little boy, 10 years old, maybe 9 years old, who's really grubby, and he's in this deep woods, the deep, horrible northwest forest where the trees, all the undergrowth is so tangled, and there's no sky, and the leaves, the arms of the trees come down to the ground. I can tell I have a strong reaction to that forest. Don't like it. I'm hoping maybe this book will get me over that a little bit. Anyway, so he's in that forest, and he's looking kind of just really sad and mad. And then there's a little girl who's just looking up, very little, maybe 6 or 7, and she's just kind of looking up, a little bemused, doesn't know what's going on, not happy, but not sad, not actively sad. Well, I put those 3 images on a card, and when I read the card, reading it, when I process the card,
Mhm.
what you do, you take an image and you say, I am the one who. So you speak from the image, like, so I spoke
Oh.
from the man who was eating the bum, eating the soup.
Mhm.
I am the one who.
Mhm.
And then what the boy said.
Mhm.
And it shocked me.
Mhm.
And I decided that would be helpful for me to write about that. I've had the card for many years.
Mhm.
It's probably maybe even, well, maybe not that long, maybe 8 years. I've had that card, and now I'm starting to write about it.
So you had that card, and then one day you were walking around and you saw the card and you said, like, how could...
No, I'd never forgotten that card. I knew about the card.
So when you were thinking about writing a new book, you just thought, you just went right back to that card?
I went back to the card. Yes, I started a notebook. Yeah, so I had for the Storekeeper, the only image I really had was the store.
Mm-hmm.
For Apsara, I had more images.
Mm-hmm.
And for this one, I actually have quite a few images, and I keep them in the notebook that I use for writing.
Mm-hmm.
To remind me, and sometimes I'll see an image, I'll say, oh yeah, that, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know I don't necessarily know if things are going to turn up in the book, because I don't impose so much my will on the book. It doesn't work so well when if I'm trying to force something to happen, it doesn't seem to happen as well as if it just unfolds.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever take writing classes?
No, I wrote I had to write in college and high school, but
Mm-hmm. That was it. So now this, yes.
oh, I do know there is something that helped. What I did do you know The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron?
Yes.
I did that book,
Your morning pages?
my morning pages, but you make a commitment to write morning pages for 3.5 months, maybe 3 months. I don't even know
Like
what
12 weeks.
12 weeks. Okay. Well, I knew I was going to be doing some traveling. And so I made my commitment. You write out the commitment at the beginning of the book. I wrote out my commitment for as long as it takes to finish the book. And it took me, again, about 8 years. The number 8 seems to be coming up a lot.
Yes.
So, and I have a friend who's an artist and always has been. That's how she makes her life. And I told her that it took me 8 years, and she said, what took so long? I said, to finish the book and do all the exercises. And she said, you did all the exercises? I just did the ones I like. I thought I never even thought of that. But the morning pages are good. They're just, you don't think about what you're going to write. It's not about your thinking. It's about putting your pen to the paper and writing. And so I would write, this is so boring. I hate this. I wish I'd never started. And then, oh, look, my handwriting is so small. You write longhand. Somebody with bigger handwriting would get done with this quicker than me. On and on and on and on for 8 years. But as a result, I'm able now to just, so you learn to deal with your inner critic. And that's where I learned about protecting my baby artist self from people who were critical, and doing things to nurture the creative piece of me. So how to say yes.
Sorry?
How to say yes to that creative piece and kind of push aside the no's, keep them at bay.
So this yes that started as a very shy yes that then became a book, and then 2 books, and then you're working on the third. Do you consider yourself an author or a writer?
I do. I was a nurse. That was my life for years and years and years and years and years. And it was a wonderful life and I loved it. And then I was done. I was, I was ready for something else. I had already published the one book and I knew I was going to go be staying in Cambodia for many months every year to be with my daughter and her family. And I didn't say I was an author at first. That was a process. But now I do. It's people ask me, occupation. I was filling out an insurance form for travel insurance overseas because my insurance doesn't cover me out of the country. So occupation, author. and it comes more easily now. It's like almost natural. So I can be called Pearl, or I can be called, people call me Margot who know me, but I often think of myself as Pearl. So I might say, Pearl and I are going to go downstairs and do some writing this afternoon.
Before we jump to the no moment, describe how is your process for writing? What is your ritual? And if it has changed from book 1 to book 3?
It hasn't changed, and I don't have a process other than feeling inside it's time to go and write. Sometimes it takes a while. I still do morning pages sometimes, not always, but I definitely do that to center. And when I go, I have a writing studio. I'm not at my house now, which is why I talked about going downstairs, because I tell them I'm going downstairs at their, when I'm visiting. But at my house, I have a tiny little house and then an even tinier writing studio. And so I go out to the writing studio and I open up my iPad with a blank page. I read the previous chapter so I remember where I am and what's going on. And then I just start. The Storekeeper structure was very much, okay, so it's August and it's Monday and he's opening the door in the store, so it will go through the week, and then it goes through the weekend and then the next week. And Apsara was a life story. So it started at the end, but then it goes back to the very beginning, to the little girl in the tiny village who's the king's man comes through and she's chosen to dance. Well, I didn't know about the king's man until I sat down. I knew a little bit about village life in Cambodia, so I was writing about what the life of a little girl in a village in Cambodia in 1200 would likely have been like. But I knew she loved to dance. And so I just start to write. And as I start to write, there's pictures that come, movie comes through. And so then I'm writing what's happening. And I write until that section is kind of ended. And it could, usually I write a chapter at a time, but sometimes I'll just do half a chapter.
So it's not defined by the many hours you need to spend on.
No, I'm not. I don't have that. Many excellent writers do have rituals. They have props. They have things they do. They have times they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and they start writing and they write X number of words, or they write a whole chapter. They outline everything in advance. And a lot of people do that. And I just
That's not your process.
Not my process. I've never, well, I always worked the night shift. So I work nights and weekends. So I didn't have the kind of life, I couldn't have routines. I think people who have routines, I think, have a very hard time on working the night shift, the overnight shift, because you have to be flexible. Your whole body has to change. You have to, okay, so I have to sleep now, even though I'm not tired. I have to sleep, or I have to sleep in today. I have to stay up late tonight so that I can sleep late in the morning and then stay up, because I don't like staying up for 24 hours. I can do it, but it's not comfortable. And I'm sure it's not as safe as a nurse, and then I have to switch. And some night nurses never switch, but I would usually switch back and forth between days and nights. So So if I had to have a routine, my mind would have just gone nuts. So my body is very willing to be flexible. I'm lucky that way.
And so the first book, when you took 8 years, 8 something years.
Right.
The second one?
The second one would have been a year or less, maybe 9 months, but I stopped to write a 2-volume memoir for my grandchildren with prompts from my daughter-in-law, that my daughter-in-law enrolled me in an app that sent me a prompt every week. And then I also, my grandson in Cambodia has a nanny. He didn't go to school at that time. He had a babysitter that came to the house, and she was pregnant, so she had a baby. So I took care of a 2-year-old for 4 months full time. So that slowed things down. So, but that was a year. And this one, I thought it would be less than a year, but I've gotten bogged down. partly because I don't like it, and partly because I've been extremely busy. And my brother was dying, and so I would go to him and spend a couple of weeks at a time there. And there are things that are important. But when I do sit down, and I'm about ready, probably tomorrow, and sit down and see what's going to happen. This one I have more of an idea, but it's weird because this one has characters in throughout different times. So we start in 1880, and then it goes back to Illinois in 1835, and then it's the Oregon Trail, and then it's the Coast Range in Washington in 1855. And so it goes through different time and different characters. It's in Quebec, the little girl in Quebec who loves taking care of things. She's always bringing home little animals, and the different lives. One grows up in what's a shack, and the nurse, the nursing sister, the habitants in Quebec were they were settled in there, and they had beautiful stone farms, everything very well maintained, they'd already been there 250 years before, in the middle of the 1800s. So
do you do research?
I do research, yes.
Is that part of the time when you go to your writing space?
Yes. I do some research while I'm writing. This book, it's interesting because I'm leaving holes. I'll sort of write the story and then kind of fit in the research later. Sometimes I'll look it up as I'm going, and I read books about the time period. So I'm a variety of different kinds of research. And I went on a book tour recently. I was on the road, and I turned off, and I'm not even sure why I turned off. That happens to me sometimes. And it turned out there was a park called Farewell Bend State Park, and it's where the Oregon Trail pioneers left the Snake River and started across to the Columbia River, across the plateau to the Columbia River. And I had actually known about Farewell Bend, and it had been in the story. And then when I researched it, all the research came up with Bend, Oregon, which didn't really happen until much later in history. So, he didn't go to Farewell Bend. And now, but actually, he will be going to Farewell Bend, as it turns out, just later on. Anyway, it's interesting the way it works out. So it's fun, yeah.
And final question before the no. Will you ever consider writing a book where you use all the experiences you had as a nurse?
Probably not.
Why not?
I've thought about, basing it around a room, like room 238, which is a room that I was in for 3 months one time, and all the different people who were in room 238 and what was happening. I mean, sometimes I think about that, or I think about like in traffic, the lives of all the people in the cars.
Mhm.
But I probably won't. I have a couple of short things that I'll probably publish at some point. Look for nursing magazines, but mostly, I don't know. I mean, it may actually, there is a nurse in the Storekeeper, and she's a psychiatric nurse, which I ended up doing. So some of I know what a locked psychiatric unit looks like. I know how it works, but I probably won't do one of experiences that I had. For one thing, there's all the confidentiality. I've gotten permission from the individuals involved to write the one thing that I probably will write.
Interesting. Okay.
And I have saved, I have just a little notebook of really funny things that happened.
Working as a nurse.
And so it was like, there's a doctor and he's in the emergency room and he's friends with the patient. It's a small town. And the patient says, "So where's your wife today?" And he said, "She's on a 6th grade field trip." And the patient said, "Oh, how many times has she been held back?" Little things like that. I used to keep it in my locker so people could write funny things that happened, and then they could open up my locker and read other funny things if they were feeling stressed. So a little book of things to make you feel, better about whatever.
Are you going to publish that one?
I probably will. Another time, a patient had been very, very constipated, and he was he was demented, but it was from alcohol, and he was recovering, and we finally got him out of bed in the big lift, and it was a major project, and we got him on the toilet, and I said, and he pooped, and we all went, "Yay!" And he said, "Do I get a gold star?" I said, "No, you get a brown star." So just things like that are fun, they make you feel better after you. When you're done laughing, you're kind of like, "Oh, I feel better." So.
Well, that's for a future project then.
Yes.
So now let's switch to the moment in your life when you decided that saying no was a much better option.
Okay. I've thought about this one a lot. My son and I were talking about this, and he was saying about balance, and some people have more yes, and some people have more no. Some people, like I was married to a man who had a knee-jerk no. He recognized it, and so his initial reaction was going to be shut the door, no, but then he might open the door later on. And some people only say yes. So their challenge will be to say no. I thought, wow, no is the first thing a 2-year-old, you say mom, you say dad, you say no. So it's the first time you separate yourself from the world and to go beyond saying no. But sometimes it's really important to say no. And I was thinking about it. I've said no fairly often. It's often difficult for me to say no, but I said no to my marriage. And it was a very good decision. I said no early enough that we didn't completely hate each other. And we didn't completely blame each other for everything in our lives. So I said no early enough that we're able to, we live on opposite sides of the country, but we talk on the phone sometimes, we email. If I go back to Vermont, visit him, we'll have, family gatherings sometimes at his house, a dinner, completely overrun his territory, and that works for brief periods of time. But it was very hard to do that. I had all those judgments about, I'm a failure if I leave the marriage. And
after how many years of being together?
Well, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was 12 years, and my husband thought it was 8 years. So we had completely different ideas from you. So it wasn't very long. We married late, and most of that, I'd spent actually quite a bit of time being separated from him. And then I spent a long time during the process of separation. I was separated for 5 years before I filed for divorce. And so I processed a lot. And then I finally realized that it wasn't going to work. I was so lonely in my marriage. I much prefer being alone to being lonely with somebody else. So I decided that it was good. And I worked with a therapist who had me bring in a lot of pictures. And we made a circle, a big circle of all the pictures of our life together. And then I pulled out some pictures that had me and the kids and made another circle for a new life. So it was a very helpful process. And it also showed me that we really hadn't, in our case, we hadn't done very much together. He had, which wasn't what I had expected at all.
How old were you when you got married?
Was 1982, so 34. And I had a daughter from another relationship who was 2. I was a late bloomer. I didn't know what I was going to do. I never thought of nursing. I never thought of doing anything that women did. I wanted to be a stevedore on the docks of New Jersey, or I wanted to go on stevedore, somebody who empties. They take boxes, crates off ships, and that was not the kind. Nowadays, a woman could probably do that, but not in 1965. So I ended up going to college, but I didn't want to be there, so I didn't do very well. And I just never, I flopped around. I lived in a Hare Krishna temple for a couple of years and traveled around. And then I finally ended up, that was one that was, I think it was harder to say no to the Krishna temple than to my marriage. Because everybody inside the temple was convinced that the worst thing you could ever do would be to leave the temple and go out to the world of illusion where nobody knew Krishna. Whereas everybody outside the temple thought you were really crazy to be inside the temple. And really, so there was no support for how to leave a circumstance which had, so many, it's just like medical school, all of the elements of brainwashing, sleep deprivation, intense focus, and repetitive instruction that this is the right way and the only right way, and this is how we do it. And everything else is wrong. So you get a lot of, and then you add the element of religion, and God is going to judge you. It's pretty intense.
So what made you say, no, I'm out of here?
There were several things I read. I liked the chanting. I liked the dancing. That's what drew me in. Plus, there was a man that I really loved who was it. But that wasn't enough. And it turned out there were lots of things like the leaders. We would live on potatoes and kind of dal that had gone by. So I've had enough dal. I don't ever order dal in a restaurant. Never. Dal is an Indian lentil soup.
D-H-A, no, D-A-H-L?
It's just D-A-L.
Yeah.
D-A-L. And so we would make it, and that's what we would live on, with potatoes.
And you were like up to here.
Right. And it, was kind of sort of rancid sometimes, but the leaders would go in to the kitchen and make their own meals with good ingredients. I learned that, and I was like, So there were a lot of things I couldn't really believe in Krishna as such, Anyway, I wrote probably 40 pages of reasons why I was leaving.
Before you
But
left.
after I left,
I am
after I
after.
sat down and wrote down about 40 pages of reasons why I was leaving. And but it's been a long time and I don't remember. And I always wish I'd saved it, but I wrote it and I mailed a copy to my friend who was still in the temple, and then I put it in the incinerator, and oh well, it's gone now. So I rely on my memory. You know, the thing that's weird is they talk about all these gods and these beings, and when you go to the temples in Cambodia, there are carvings of the big battles, and the gods are on there, flying creatures. But I never really took it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But that experience that I had in Cambodia that started Apsara was very, very intense.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that was the most intense was that it had never occurred to me that those animals made a sound.
Mm.
But the whole world was filled with the sound of this one god, Garuda. He's not really a god, he's half eagle, half man.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely enormous, just huge and so loud.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, I'd probably still be in the Krishna temple if I had heard this 50 years ago, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. So it's interesting. Anyway, so I had a lot of reasons for leaving, but no support in it.
When you left, was it just one day you woke up and said, I'm out of here?
No, it was over a period. It was over a period of it took me about a week to make the decision. And I actually I just withdrew into myself. I spent an entire day just lying on the floor. I had a sleeping bag, but it wasn't, I mean, it was really, there was no stuffing in it. So it was just two little thin pieces of nylon, and we slept on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I just lay on the floor for about a day without talking to anybody, 24 hours. And when I got up, I knew what I needed to do. So I really went inward to come up with that no.
And then did you inform anyone that you were leaving, or did you just
Yes,
go out?
yes.
Or...
No, I told them I was leaving, but I didn't stop walking. I just kept, and I didn't
Were
own
they
any.
trying to convince you otherwise?
There really was not much opposition.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's
So
good.
yeah. They, nobody came after me and tried to steal me back.
So which one was harder, that saying no to that or saying no to your marriage?
I think that was harder. It was my second big no, and it took place over a shorter period, but I had much more support saying no to my marriage, both societally and with friends. And I took a long period of time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very slow, gradual moving away, although I knew I knew that it needed to happen, but I took my time with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Hare Krishna temple, I knew I needed to leave, but there was no support, and I just went inside for 24 hours and got up and said, okay, I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And the people, and of course I was living in Montreal. I had no money, and I didn't own anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to some friend's house. I did still have friends who lived in the neighborhood, and I went to some friend's house, and they let me stay. And of course, there's no meat, fish, or eggs. There's no alcohol or caffeine. There's no stimulants or intoxicants. No sex outside of marriage, within marriage, only for the purpose of procreation.
Mm-hmm.
And no, they call it mental speculation, which is like thinking. No thinking.
Very
It's
dangerous.
one of the 4 rules, no thinking. A lot of places that's true. A lot of cults or systems of belief. In fact, we're seeing it right now, I think, in our country where people are upset that, no, we're not going to think about that. No, we're not going to think about this.
Mhm.
You think about this. Okay. I got off topic, but I don't know where.
Okay, well, as I have seen over the course of an hour, you are full of very interesting experiences, Pearl.
Yes, I've had a very full life. One time I wrote up my resume. I didn't know what to do with all these years I lost. Like, I lived in a Zen meditation center. I lived in the Hare Krishna for a couple of years. I wandered around. I did this and that. I went to school for 7 years and never graduated. I never even finished my 3rd year because I was looking for the absolute truth.
Mhm.
And you can't find it at university.
See,
Well,
that's
maybe
very.
if you're a theoretical physicist, you can.
Can
So
you
I just
imagine?
put everything in my resume, I've delivered cows by C-section, in Iowa, and all the different things I did. I just put them all together and put them on my resume. And I was applying as a job as a secretary after I had my daughter. I left nursing briefly, and I went to a doctor, and he read it and he said, "You've had such an interesting life. All I ever did was go to medical school." And I said, "Yeah, you're right, I did. But here I am, looking for a minimum wage job as a secretary in your office." I didn't get the job. But I've had a lot of fun and a lot of interesting things. So.
That's a very interesting point. Can you imagine what would happen if, and it's mostly for women, when you stop working because you have to start, or you decide to start a family, or because you have to take care of someone, and then you want to go back years later to work, and then you have this huge gap. That, just imagine what would happen if, instead of turning in a CV that has this gap, you could actually write about all those years, all those experiences, that would let someone who would hire you, that it would give them so much more information about who you are, what you're capable of, than to just say, well, I just had to take the time off because I had to do this and that. It would be so much more informative, rich.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, you're managing finances, you're managing people with different demands all the time, night and day.
Yes.
There was a college in Vermont called Goddard College, and they had a program where you could use your life experience.
Really?
You write up your life experience, and you could get college credits for it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was good. I absolutely. What do you do with those? There was a very funny cartoon after Jerry Garcia died and the Grateful Dead stopped being on tour.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a guy in a suit sitting in the employment office, and the HR manager is reading his resume and says, "Well, what about the years from 1965 to 1985? He said, "I was touring with the Grateful Dead." It was 1995. I don't know whether the things you learned there would be helpful or not, but yeah, sometimes we want our employees maybe in a little box. Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful book called The Pursuit of Excellence. I think it's by Tom Peters, and it's about management styles and how different management styles work for different people. Mm-hmm. Some people do need a very directive style. They need to be checked in on give them very concrete tasks, give them direction, check in with them. And then all the way up to people, very creative people, if you try to do that, it's going to be a disaster. Mm-hmm. They'll go somewhere else. They won't be able to they'll be dissatisfied, and you lose the benefit of all that potential creativity. Mm-hmm. But it requires a lot of a manager to do that and of a system.
Yeah. Well, very nice. You
Wonderful.
have so much material to.
You're gonna have to. I don't know how you're gonna splice it all, but good luck with it. Thank you.
So Margaret/Margot/Pearl. It was a pleasure having you here. And what if I say yes? I hope you had a good time.
I did. I had a wonderful time, and it's really given me a lot to think about. And I've been telling people about it. What if I say yes? So thank you so much. Okay.
You're
Bye-bye.
very welcome. Now, remember to send me pictures, images of the things you would like to share that we talked about, anything you feel comfortable sharing. I'll post them. I'll add them to the video at the end.
Okay.
You decide.
Okay. You know, I did a presentation on So You Want to Write a Book. I will put, I'll send you the card, the soul collage card for the confession.
Okay.
And I did a video presentation. There's something called Nerd Night, which happens around the world. And there's one in Phnom Penh, and I did a presentation on So You Want to Write a Book. The format is you make up slides, and each slide is projected for 20 seconds. So you have 20 seconds to talk about each slide, and there are 20 slides. So 400-second presentation. And some of those are fun, but like procrastination. What do you do about procrastination? How do I take care of my baby writer self? I'll send it. You don't have to use them, but yeah.
Oh no, just send me whatever you would like to share, and I sure I'll add them to the end. Thank you so much.
I did just find a picture of myself as a Hare Krishna. It was in my brother's photo album. So,
there you go. If you feel comfortable sharing that with the audience.
Vishnu Devi Dasi. See, there was another name.
Send me everything you would like.
Okay, thank you so much. This is great.